Welcome pilots, my name is Hybrid V, and in today's video I want to relay the absolute metric ton of info and data we learned from CIG's recent tech preview that closed out a few days ago for both Evocati and Wave 1 testers. Now first and foremost, I want to be upfront and say that despite the bugs, glitches, and weirdness from this early preview, this was by far some of the most fun I've had in the game in quite a while. I spent every single day while it was in Evocati, and then every day after while it was also in Wave 1, just testing things out, trying out different things, and I was absolutely obsessed with it. This is the reason why it took me so long to get this video out to you all. I recorded just over 250 gigs of gameplay footage of just me documenting my time poking and prodding the engineering mechanics coming to the game, and also learning about the various balance adjustments and understanding what worked and what didn't. So there's a lot of ground for me to cover, and if you're interested in something very specific about engineering and the tech preview, be sure to refer to the timestamps below to jump ahead. Alright, first, let's talk about how engineering works aboard a ship. The most obvious change to note is the introduction of the resource network. This is the internal name CIG gave it, and it refers to the systemic connections of all your components aboard your ship and how those systems govern its performance. Aboard many multi-crew and even some single-seat ships with an interior are engineering consoles. These give you a deeper look at what is going on under the hood. They help you identify the location of critical components, give user control over doors and even atmosphere controls, and you can also balance power allocation like the power MFD that we already have on our pilot displays. And these power allocation settings can be saved as presets as well if desired. The engineering console is essential for diagnosing problems with the ship, and when you're aboard the ship that does not have one, it really feels like you're missing out on a lot of information. You can still view the layout from the star map, but most of the details provided by the engineering consoles are almost a must-have. For example, the wardens in the tech preview did not have functioning engineering consoles, so the pilot had to read the new Diagnostics page in the MFDs to figure out what was actually wrong, and then direct the turret gunner to fix it, rather than the gunner checking the console for themselves to identify the problem. With the new resource network being implemented, we now have components that generate said resources, starting with the power plant. The power plant generates power for your ship and subsystems. Without power, the ship ceases to function. This includes major systems like your thrusters shutting off all the way to doors on your ship refusing to open and requiring a manual override. In these current builds, there was no battery backup system, which was proposed by CIG some time ago, and it is supposed to supply auxiliary power during low power scenarios for short periods of time while you get your main power plant back online. So during testing, once the power plant was dead, the ship was effectively dead as well, at least until you repaired the power plant. This brings us to the relay networks, which relay power to parts of the ship. Now originally, relay networks were supposed to control power distribution, and if they had faults, it would cause power failures for components on very specific parts of the ship. This meant that ships had effectively weak points that could cripple the entire ship at a given moment. CIG has appeared to reverse this behavior, and now it instead affects power pip generation from the power plant. How many pips you can allocate to power systems is now relying on how many fuses you have in your relay at their current location. If you lose fuses, you'll start to lose power pips in those areas, and as a result, you'll have performance degradation. In my opinion, this is actually pretty interesting and probably a better design decision, as I think having those old singular failure points that could brick the entire ship was kind of a little bit short-sighted, and I'm glad CIG went a different route with it. Now, the power plant generating all that power for the ship cannot operate on its own. It needs a constant supply of coolant to keep it from overheating, catching fire, and then, well, exploding. This is where the coolers come in. Coolers distribute coolant throughout the ship and keep each component operating at optimal temperatures. If they become damaged or destroyed, their ability to cool components becomes compromised, and then those components will start to take damage and eventually catch on fire. You can see basic temperature readouts on your power page of your MFDs to see the trend of heat building up. The more power being allocated to a system, for example engines or your shields or even your weapons, can improve their performance, but it could also cause the coolers to lose efficiency at cooling those areas. So for example, you can slam all your power points into your engines, but you can expect those engines to overheat a lot faster as a result of the higher amount of power output. Fail to balance the temperatures and you can expect failures and even fires to break out. And these fires are pretty nasty. They can heat up entire rooms, causing temperatures to soar out of control and causing additional cascading failures to nearby components because they get too hot and automatically will shut down to protect themselves. So once a fire is under control, it is important to get the room scrubbed and the ambient temperatures back under control. This is where life support comes in. Life support is now being modeled on gold standard ships for 4.4 and beyond. They even have a little filter that can be replaced, although in our testing, we had no way to actually buy new ones, but it doesn't seem like they really need to be replaced anyway, so it wasn't really that big of a deal. Life support is also important for, well, breathing, and if you needed to take a swig of your water bottle and your life support systems are offline, well, hopefully you can hold your breath long enough to take a nice, cool, refreshing sip before you die. When life support is working right, it slowly readjusts the air temperatures back to safer levels. It also repressurizes the room with air if it has been exposed to decompression. This decompression can happen if one of your exterior doors remains open to vacuum, such as a ramp or a docking collar, which is more likely to happen in combat as you take damage. This is why shields are critical, because they can block or at least mitigate damage to your ship exterior and prevent this decompression. But the shields need to stay cool and powered as well to operate. If they take damage, their ability to block or reduce incoming damage becomes limited to the point where they can outright fail or their recharge cycles start to slow down. Lack of shielding can lead to other components getting damaged, such as radar systems, which are now also being modeled in 4.4 onward. These components govern your ability to see radar contacts and, of course, target them. Without it, you're effectively blind to the outside world and to whoever is beating you up. And of course, you have your quantum and jump drive. If you're getting smacked around, you may want to flee, but if your quantum drive is damaged during combat, you may not even be able to spool the drive up to get away in time. Damaged drives have poor functioning spool times and can even fail your jump mid-travel. The same is said with jump drives, although I did not get a chance to test what happens when those are low on health and experience misfires while you're in the middle of a jump point. Now with our old damage model, we have a health pool based system, where if a critical section of the ship, such as the central fuselage, reached 0 HP, the ship would explode, or at least soft death as it does now currently. With the engineering tech preview, ships still have an HP pool, but these pools are substantially increased, effectively improving survival rates and ensuring that component knockouts are more likely to happen. This is meant to supplant soft death, as in fact soft death was meant to replicate this behavior with our current old damage model. Now, ships can still explode, of course, but this is much harder to achieve now. With boosted hull health values, component failures caused by weapons fire penetrating the hull are far more common than outright destruction. Critical hits to systems like the power plant can still cause the ship to explode, but it is still rare regardless. Essentially, hull HP represents overall structural integrity. If it gets depleted, then this essentially would be a hull break. It is also important to note that armor was not in the game for the tech preview, as armor is meant to protect vital areas of the ship, and hull HP is meant to represent structural integrity while also being an additional protective layer, so they must go hand in hand. But it does seem that CIG wants to get the hull aspect right first before implementing armor, and then eventually moving on to something like Maelstrom down the line. This means that the time to kill, or TTK, can be all over the place, from fights ending in just mere seconds to lasting for tens of minutes on end. Now, obviously this is not going to be the final values, and it's not the final product we can expect, as CIG probably wants the hull of the ship to take a beating before components start to get knocked out quickly. This will have the knock-on effect of leaving battle scars on ships after action, and you will need a longer time to kill for that to happen. With our current damage model, the most damage you'll ever really see on your ship is a lost wing or an engine, and seeing some torn up bits here and there. But with these new balance changes, ships will now be able to sport impressive battle damage, and ships left abandoned for other salvagers to find later will have their own stories to tell about how that ship met its end. In the tech preview, this knockout happens when the components die, giving you the opportunity to try to nurse the ship back to health using salvage multi-tool attachments to fix broken components and get them back up and running again, allowing you the opportunity to flee the area or get right back into the fight. For those of you that have been watching my videos for some time now, you know that I've been saying for years that solo multi-crew will get harder as time goes on, since CIG has made it abundantly clear that they intend to deepen the simulation aspects even further. And as a result, this tech preview showcases the downside to solo multi-crew ships in spades. At least once the combat starts, flying by yourself doing cargo missions probably won't cause you any real issues aside from the occasional wear and tear that you'll need to address. But the moment the bullets start to fly, or you screw up mining a rock in your solo mole, and you have no one to help you as your ship is engulfed in flames, is when things can go south really fast. Now, I've been talking about multi-crew for the most part, but these still affect small single-seat fighters as well. So while it is possible to get knocked out in a single-seater, during this time you can still operate your MFDs in a low-power state and use the new Diagnostics page. From here you can see your component's wear state, its current health, and toggle them on and off if needed. If a component is destroyed, you can have it self-repair itself once from the MFD. After some time has elapsed, the component will be repaired back up to 20% of its health. It is always critical to repair coolers and then the power plant. If those are operating, you can at least leave the area and then stop yourself from moving if you're drifting in space, so you can then get out of the ship and properly triage the damage with the salvage repair tool. Now, this one-time repair is available to all ships in the game and only shows up if the component is destroyed. So even if you're soloing a multi-crew ship and something gets destroyed, you at least have that option to help you out. Just keep in mind that bigger components take substantially longer to self-repair than if you did it yourself. You can also vent your entire ship using the new engineering console to prevent fires from spreading, but it won't address the problem of a component overheating and taking damage if the coolers are non-functional. At some point, you will need to stop what you are doing and fix the damage yourself. A tall order when you're in combat. This is why multi-crew ships are far more efficient with a crew, since if the ship is knocked out, they can all grab a repair tool and start working on getting the ship back up and running again, just enough to at least let the pilot escape and save the ship. They then can exit the ship in a much safer area to repair components, hull HP, weapons, and even thrusters. In the tech preview, components could be repaired back to full health, even after they were destroyed. I believe in the future this will not be the case, as components will have a max health they can be repaired back to, eventually meaning that components will have essentially a shelf life and need to be replaced over long periods of time. So what is nice is you can also repair your thrusters now by hand, like I mentioned, so if you have some torque imbalance, you can exit and repair your mains and your maneuvering thrusters and get them back up to tip-top shape. I can already see capital ship owners salivating at the idea that they can have crews repairing fighters coming back from sorties. We can already do that now, of course, but we can only really repair hull damage. With engineering, we can fix weapon systems and thrusters, on top of replacing missiles by hand and replacing weapons for more ammo. And the only really thing we're missing is proper replenishment of actual ammo without having to replace the weapon system, and also replenishing fuel while in the hangar bay. And luckily for us, this is already expected to come in next year, at least according to CIG. These changes also meant weapon balance needed to change, of course. CIG seems to want to squeeze fights even closer, with laser weapons having a much shorter range. We're talking anywhere from 900 meters for the smaller size ones, all the way to around 1200 to 1300 meters for the size 4 and 5s respectively. Railguns still retained their high ballistic velocity and had a decent range, making them very effective at sniping, but with the limited damage they did, this means they were relegated to basically getting lucky hits on components from long ranges. Ballistics in general have a slightly longer range, but they build heat rapidly, and once overheated they enter a critical state where it cannot fire. After this state ends, the gun still needs to cool down further, otherwise you will just seize it up again over and over and you won't really do any damage. A lot of weapons in the preview seem to also have higher dispersion, so they were far less accurate. Not really as important since they're much shorter engagement ranges, but it does mean that focusing directly on components in a fight was tricky without the use of precision targeting mode. And when in precision targeting mode, you lack the self-status page and the targeting data, and basically that just leaves you ignorant to the status of both your ship and your opponent when you're trying to hunt for components while in ADS mode. It's one of those things that's kind of annoying about precision targeting, is your inability to see what's going on with your ship and the enemy ship, and it just really shows the shortcomings of precision targeting mode. So I do hope CIG does plan on addressing that, especially since it's a very critical component of combat when you're targeting a larger multi-crew ship and you're trying to go after those sensitive components. Now, these ranges are intended to bring ships closer together in combat. It also reduces the opportunity for fighters to cheese multi-crew ships like we've seen before, an issue that's been plaguing the game for quite a while, even after the introduction of master modes. Keep in mind that this was the tech preview and will of course eventually change, so everything I talk about here is always subject to some type of change in design direction. I do expect that they will try to make balancing happen on a far more systemic level going forward, such as power output affecting ranges, and even with crafting we could potentially see components or turret weapon variations that may be highly sought after for imparting modifiers such as higher projectile velocities or improved ranges. But we don't have that yet, but eventually I do see this system leading to that. Either way, these changes completely change the way a fighter approaches a fight against, say, a multi-crew ship. Just in this footage here alone, you can see I'm working on getting a safe angle on this Freelancer while the AI desperately tries to get its turret gunner an angle to attack me. It just makes the fights feel far more dynamic, faster, and more higher stakes, and that's just exactly what I think the game needed, and it just really shows here, and it's really just a lot of fun. Like I said, it's high stakes because at the end of the day, I know that if my shields go down, there's a chance I could be critically crippled by that turret gunner, despite the fact that it's only size 3 weapons. So I need to make sure that I'm staying at a safe angle, while at the same time the AI is desperately trying to protect itself from me. This dynamism is brought about because we now know that ships are no longer just a health pool system where we can just play rock'em sock'em robots like we're used to. We actually have to be cognizant of the fact that we could actually be screwed over at any moment, and we actually need to take care and be careful about what goes on during combat. Now, lasers are not as effective at penetrating shields, but once they get past the shields, they can quickly set fire to the interior of a ship. Now, ballistics don't set fires nearly as often, but they can rip through shields far more effectively. They also do a lot more structural hull damage, so they're perfect for ripping off engines, wings, and other parts of the ship, as well as targeting components themselves. The Wolf, for example, was an absolute menace, since its twin rotary chain guns can shred through any ship's hull rapidly. Cannons are about what you can expect. They do a lot more effective damage per shot, and some weapons even had their splash damage added back, such as the C788 Combine Cannon. And naval weapons, such as the Idris M's size 6 M98 bearing cannon, had a large blast radius on impact, which meant it could knock out multi-crew ships in just a quick, short burst. Sadly, the size 7 Conqueror cannon upgrade for the Idris was completely broken, which was a bummer, as I really wanted to see if CIG not only fixed the seizure-inducing muzzle flash, but also to just see what they did with the weapon in general, and how they made it more viable in naval combat. So hopefully they'll get that sorted out by the next time we get it in our hands. The Idris M's railgun had a range decrease, coming down from 10 kilometers right now currently in live, all the way down to 5 kilometers in the tech preview. The projectile from the railgun was also slowed down, and it felt a lot less impactful. Now, it still can slap around hammerheads in 1 or 2 shots, but remember, full destruction of a ship is not common anymore with these changes. So knockout was quick, but full destruction took a lot more shots. I was disappointed I could not try out the K's laser beam in this tech preview as I ran out of time, but I do hope to check it out again in later iterations. Now, on the flip side, the Polaris's main gun also had splash damage impact, and it did a ton of damage. I love that CIG is willing to dial up the craziness of naval weapons, and it's pretty much exactly how I envisioned it when capital ships were just a twinkle in our eyes years back. These things are an absolute menace, as they have always should been, and it seems that engineering is letting CIG go really crazy with this stuff, and I absolutely love it. On the other end of naval combat, torpedoes got sped up drastically. For example, size 9s move very fast, which makes them very dangerous to capital ships, as their PDCs can struggle to track incoming torpedoes. Along with their higher speeds, arming times were increased as well, anywhere between 6 to about 8 seconds. If you're traveling towards a target at high speed and firing very close, there's a high likelihood the torpedo will not detonate. This means you need to stay further back to actually score hits. This gives gunners, PDCs, and of course the countermeasures the capital ship has, more opportunity to stop an incoming torpedo. Size 10 torpedoes also got a slight speed and agility buff, and in our testing we were able to even hit small multi-crew AI targets with it, with some difficulty as the torpedoes would constantly miss the smaller targets, but they do hit them eventually. Full spreads that hit a capital ship will absolutely demolish them, although the tech preview was a little bit buggy, and in some cases there were some weird lag issues that you could definitely see on your screen here. But it does show that torps are still back on top once more. Smaller torpedoes like the size 5s have traditionally been some of the worst torpedoes in the game, and they have been buffed slightly here. While they still only tickle capital ships, they instead shine when deployed against small and medium multi-crew ships, which they have the ability to even one-tap if you're not careful and you get hit by one of those. Larger multi-crew ships like the Hammerhead and the Reclaimer easily can shrug these torpedoes off, with the latter's PDCs easily swatting entire salvos away. The other benefit that engineering gave to a lot of ships in the game was it breathed new life into previously terrible combat ships. For example, the Starlancer TAC is widely regarded as one of the worst combat ships in the game currently. Even though it is meant to be a frontline combat vessel, in the current live build, because of the current HP damage model that we have, current weapon ranges, and its poor speed, the TAC gets easily bullied by even the smallest ship, and it dies quickly as a result. Now with engineering, ships can go the distance in a toe-to-toe fight. It still can have its components knocked out easily, but the higher health pool means the ship can trade against other multi-crew ships in a proper slug match, and the shorter weapon ranges means that fighters must get closer to apply damage, putting them at risk of getting blasted by the defensive turrets. The TAC also got an agility improvement, making it an absolute fiend in combat. Other ships that had felt like glorified paperweights before now really feel like they come into their own now when backed into a fight with engineering enabled and these new balance changes. Ships like the Carrack can actually defend itself properly thanks to its new weapon balance, although the components had some misalignment issues that does need to be addressed in subsequent patches. The Santakiai, a ship that is generally disliked due to underperforming in combat, mostly because of its large size, making it easy to hit and destroy at nearly any range. But with these changes, the Santakiai is not only a very nimble medium fighter that behaves like a light fighter, it's also an absolute tank, making it a veritable wrecking ball against other mediums and multi-crew ships, since its health is not as much of a factor anymore. Even the humble Nomad is now a fun scrapper that can take a punch or two on the chin. Although its doors don't function when you lose power, so you're effectively trapped on the ship and you have to eject when that happens. So yeah, CIG needs to figure that problem out. Now, let's be clear, these balance changes are not overnight going to make multi-crew ships gods of combat, not just yet. If you're putting around in your Caterpillar and a bunch of pirates roll up with a few Ares, you're still going to get flattened. But at least you can put up a decent fight and make them work for it now. And as always, a good escort makes survival far more likely. Now let's talk component types. Right now, as it stands, everyone generally goes for the highest grade military components for combat vessels, particularly for shields and power plants, since they offer the highest performance. In the engineering preview, performance felt largely the same regardless of what was being used. And this was mostly due to the lack of access to higher-end components for us to test. We were able to test higher-end components in Arena Commander, but without a repair tool to be able to equip, there was no way to test the survivability of higher-grade components and really put them to the test. So we were mostly relegated to testing with purchasable components in the Persistent Universe testing environment. Now, from what data I could kind of surmise from my own testing, it did seem that military equipment wore out much faster. On the Diagnostics MFD page, you can see the component health, and on the left of that, you can see the wear status of how worn down a component is over time. Military parts generally seem to wear out faster. Repairing at a station did not seem to fix the wear initially, so it may be that this is not plugged in quite yet, at least in this tech preview it wasn't. This wear was much more noticeable on capital ships. While testing the Idris, we did notice that some of the components have worn down to about 80% of their normal values after about half an hour of gameplay. Now, obviously, once more, these are not the final values, but it does give an indication as the direction CIG wants to go with this kind of stuff. And we know that capital class ships is something that they want to make costly to operate. And one way they may do that is making maintenance cost higher for capitals and larger multi-crew ships. Industrial components had decent performance and would wear out very slowly, but they also seemed very fragile. Now, not as fragile as civilian or competition grade components, but definitely not as robust as the military ones. It is hard to say exactly how much of a difference there actually was without any concrete data, and more access to different component types and also repair tools in Arena Commander would have helped as well too, but we just didn't have that available to us during the testing. And on the topic of components, I do want to talk about shields, more specifically how they're balanced. Besides the actual hull, shields play a critical role in stopping or at least mitigating incoming damage that could threaten the interior components. As it stands right now, across the board, it seems like all shield generators had much slower recharge times. With the closer ranges, this makes some sense as you don't want shields to constantly recharge back to full rapidly while a fighter is doing boom and zoom passes. This also means that dogfights are much higher stakes, since once the shields are down, even with the shorter engagement ranges and shorter disengagement distances needed to get out of combat, shields still took a long time to recharge. And it would often discourage you from re-engaging right away because you knew your shields were going to take some time to come back. It also gave your opponent the opportunity to press the attack if they had the advantage of higher shield coverage. And even slower ships with gunners like the Hammerhead and the Constellation can have the opportunity to close the gap on fleeing fighters and put pressure on them. So it really changes the dynamic, and those shields coupled with weapon ranges seem to really change things up a lot. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what else they do with it. I do know that they are still deepening how the characteristics behave with the weapon systems currently, the projectile system, and hull. And again, this is before they even implemented armor. So these ranges coupled with the shield changes just really add some interesting dynamism, and I'm really curious to see how it plays out. Not just on a small scale of just small ships fighting each other and whatnot, but also on a grander scale where you have proper fleet battles and actual escorts helping them out and everything like that. Now, there may also be an additional play between distortion weapons and components, but I only briefly tested some distortion weapons and the shutdown time seemed to be pretty fast, outright knocking components pretty quickly on top of using weapon damage to also bring down shields in the process. We know that they want to do localized distortion damage on impact, and I'm not entirely sure if that was present in this tech preview, as I did not get a lot of time to test it out as much as I would have liked, but they do seem pretty strong, at least in my limited testing that I had. This is something I want to explore a little bit more in later previews if we do get them, as I want to know what options crews are going to have when facing things like distortion damage. I think the most interesting aspect of engineering is how it plays into salvage gameplay. In many cases, I wanted to try different weapons out, but rather than buying new weapons, I would just take them off of dead ships I took out. With engineering, you can repair weapons and thrusters as well as your hull and components, like I mentioned previously, so it was really nice to be able to salvage guns from a dead ship and just swap them out on my old ones. Currently, players hunt in PvP areas to look for destroyed ships to see if they have grade A military components or NDB repeaters. If you want to have them, you have to bring them back, either attaching them manually to your ship and heading back home, or put them down a cargo elevator, in which case then you would have to use the VMA to attach them. Either way, you're probably going to have to repair them afterwards, and that does cost money. With the tech preview, you can do all of that on the spot. You can take the equipment, put it on your ship, and then repair it back to full strength and use it right away. You can even revive knocked out ships from nothing back to full strength. In Arena Commander, I tested out Pirate Swarm, and I even knocked out the Hammerhead that was in there, EVA'd into the ship, killed the pilot, and then was able to get into the sea and revive all the components that were dead back to 20% HP. Now, I just ultimately self-destructed the ship because I wanted to continue Pirate Swarm, but if I had a repair tool in Arena Commander, I could have brought that ship back to full fighting strength and got it going once more, although ultimately was unnecessary, but you can definitely see that it is 100% possible. I would not be surprised if players abandoned their ship after it being knocked out, and another player could come across that ship and be able to fix it back up. Eventually, we'll have the ability to claim ships for our own after changing their registry, so this eventually opens the door way down the line when players can actually come across abandoned ships and claim it for themselves. Now, obviously, this endeavor is meant to be time-consuming and expensive, but ultimately it's supposed to be cheaper than outright buying a brand new version of that ship, so it gives players the opportunity to hunt for something they like and potentially bring it back up, almost like a barn find for a car or something like that, and just kind of working on it and eventually making it your own. But this goes beyond just that as well. This will also open up some avenues for SRV owners as well, since a player could potentially get knocked out, and maybe they just didn't bring repair equipment, or their components are just fried and they don't have any ability to replace it. They can hire another SRV player to tow them back to a spaceport so they can get spare parts and tools to get their ship back up and running again, or that SRV owner can have some spare components in its bay and then charge that player for repairs to get them back up and running again. This is all, of course, just theory crafting, but you can see the potential that engineering brings to the game here, even in just the short term whenever they bring engineering in. Now, ground vehicles also were included in the tech preview, with the Storm and the Nova and a few other transports like the STV included in the engineering testing. In a tank duel, the Nova took roughly about the same amount of shots as it always does, and it can blow up pretty quickly, but now shots can actually fry power plants and coolers, and fires are a lot more common with these small size zero components, giving the crew the chance to actually flee the moment they take a hit and they catch on fire. Ships now hunting for ground vehicles have a lot more options available to them, as it makes them a lot more deadly to those ground vehicles than they ever have been before. For one, the signatures of ground vehicles were raised once again, making it easy for ships to spot them on the ground. And two, with ballistic penetration, it's very easy for a ship to do a few strafing passes on a tank and knock it out pretty quickly, or at least set it on fire. This was far more noticeable with the Ares Inferno, Star Citizen Space A-10, as it could strafe a Nova or a Storm and knock out its components in one or two passes pretty quickly. Now, ground vehicles will be my next area of exploration if we get another tech preview soon, as I only tested them out in Arena Commander with no access to repair tools, so it made it kind of hard to gauge how quickly a crew can get one back up and running if knocked out in a fight. I'm really hoping for scenarios where the vehicle could be knocked out but the gun is still functional, forcing the crew to scramble to fix the faults while the gunner continues to engage targets. And I really want to see more of this kind of emergent gameplay kind of take place now that engineering is going to facilitate. There's going to be a lot of people having some incredible war stories about their time in the belt and some pirate came to harass them and their ship was on fire, but they were able to get some lucky shots on that guy and he lost control, his ship powered off, and he was able to get out of his seat and quickly fix his components and get away with the skin of his teeth. And there's just going to be tons of cool stories players are going to be telling about their experience in Star Citizen that goes beyond what we're used to now, and more or less involves a lot of engineering because of how systemic the nature of this gameplay is, and it just creates just chaos, absolute chaos, and it's really, really incredible to see, and I'm looking forward to seeing it in the game soon. So, on the subject of ground vehicles, you may be wondering about the counterplay between anti-aircraft and ground vehicles and ships, since they can easily pick off tanks and strafe passes. Now, the Centurion was not ready for engineering, but its weapons did feature the same balance pass for all weapons, and it had pretty much the same shorter ranges as a result. If you want to protect a location, it can hold its own for anything just over a kilometer. But personally, I would like to see it have longer ranges so it can actually create an area of denial much more effectively, but we'll have to see how balance shakes out over time. The Ballista felt more or less the same. I think the missiles were a little bit faster. I did not get a chance to try it with another person to test how effective countermeasures were. But on that same note, I did test the Storm AA, and those missiles were dang bullets coming out of the tubes. Those size 1 missiles are extremely fast, and of course you can fire a lot of them in a short period of time, so I feel like those things are pretty dangerous, especially with how Star Citizen is right now, where server lag can really kill players because of the lag when it comes to deploying countermeasure decoys, as it takes a while for the decoys to actually spawn into the world because of lag, so missiles have that advantage. So that thing is probably going to be pretty dangerous. Speaking of missiles, many felt very inconsistent in this playtest, as some would feel like they did no damage in one instance, only in another to vaporize a target in one hit. For example, in this footage here, I am firing a missile at an AI constellation that was in good health, and it was demolished completely in one hit by a missile. But other times when I would test it out, the missile would just rarely ever get kills, only against small fighters I would actually score proper kills. Now, this leads me to the rest of my feedback section, and I think that is probably the biggest issue I had with this build for the tech preview was just the inconsistency, not just with missiles, but also normal weapons as well. I would take gauntlet missions over and over to test combat, and each time was different because of the damage inconsistencies. Sometimes I would breeze through it, blowing up all the enemies rapidly and even blowing up the multi-crew ship pretty rapidly. Other times it felt like an absolute slog as I could not destroy the hull to get credit for the kill for long periods of time. You can still destroy ships by depleting hull health, but applying damage just felt all over the place. At one point we tried a Carrack and continued firing on a knocked out Constellation for minutes on end, and it just would never blow up. Only in the next engagement to vaporize it in practically a single hit. Some ships performed normally as you would expect, and others like the Wolf would absolutely shred and outperform with its dual ballistics. But other ships running ballistics didn't feel the same way in that regard. The damage was just all over the board, and it was clear CIG is still tinkering with the balance as it stands. And a massive undertaking with how new this system is and just the sheer complexity and diversity of ships and weapons that are being brought to the table here. I suspect this inconsistent behavior might have something to do with how components also play a role in ship destruction, such as a power plant exploding. But the other issue is the lack of feedback with the current HUD. If you knock out a ship during a fight, there is no indication of this happening. You can identify on the target interface that you set a component fire. It actually blinks to let you know that there's a component fire actually happening on that ship, but that's really the only information you get. And those fires can spread rapidly aboard that ship, and that ship will eventually probably explode if not taken care of. And of course, if you're shooting at AI, they don't take care of the ship themselves, so it eventually will probably explode. And I say probably because, again, it's very inconsistent. Sometimes you'll set a ship on fire and it takes minutes on end for it to explode, and other times you'll set it on fire and it explodes literally in 30 seconds. And again, it's just completely inconsistent and random, and I'm okay with it being very variable in this regard if we had information to convey what was actually happening. That would be a lot more useful to the player. Now, this inconsistency also carried over to your own ship. Every so often you would lose power to the ship, and your ship wouldn't tell you anything about why you lost power. You can sometimes surmise the problem by looking at the annunciator panel, but for the most part you have to kind of guess by just looking through the diagnostics page and seeing what's wrong. This is easier to identify with ships that have an engineering console, but just the overall lack of feedback just makes it difficult to track actual issues on your ship. Most shutdowns occur from components catching on fire, as they will shut themselves down to protect themselves. And while occasionally on certain ships you'll see messages alerting you to fires, these messages are also very inconsistent, and sometimes they won't even say that there's a fire in your ship when there actually is one. Again, you have to dig through the menus to figure out the problem, and the simple HUD warning along with annunciator panels is sufficient enough to tell you what problems there are, but there still needs to be a lot more detail in regards to telling you what the problem is. For example, if you told me that my cooler shut down because it's on fire, that would be very useful information. If you told me my power plant is low on power because it's damaged, that would be useful information to know. But as it stands right now, we don't get any of that, and you just kind of have to guess by looking at the very bare bones stuff that we have available to us now, currently in the game. I'm hoping CIG is looking into this, and I'm hoping they're looking to expand the warnings messages soon. I'm pretty sure they will because it feels like a no-brainer, but we'll see. Now, in these tests, penetration and damage to components was far too common for my liking. This will be mitigated when armor is also implemented, but we know that hull is also supposed to stop rounds as well too, but damage to components was just far too common as it stands now, leading to burnouts and fires just happening way too regularly. CIG wants combat to be close-range slug matches, and when things start to break is when the player and their crew would want to leave to fix things up. The idea is that a ship coming back from a hard-fought engagement should look beat up with battle scars, smoke, and damaged wings, etc. It should look beat up, but this doesn't actually happen now because knockouts would happen far too often and not allow fights to drag on longer than expected. This was acknowledged by CIG, and they intend to readjust projectile penetration in subsequent testing as they want to get hull integrity and protection right before they layer armor on as an additional feature. Now, I like the weapon range changes along with the improvement to ship handling across the board. It brings combat much closer, but it also makes action feel much more faster and frenetic. Smaller fighters tackling larger ships have to focus on using their agility to stay out of the firing arcs, but the larger ships still have decent role characteristics. So there's this constant tug of war with each other, which I really enjoy. One of my favorite changes are that naval ships are an absolute terror, and I love it, as they should be. If you come across a Polaris or Idris, you should have to actually respect it rather than ignore it like we currently do in PvP right now. Now, there was a lot of bugs in the tech preview, like for example, fires were desynced quite immensely. You could even hear invisible fires everywhere. Some players would see actual fires and others would not, and this further exacerbated the lack of feedback issues as I mentioned before. Now, some ships that had engineering enabled had some major flaws with them. One of the most notable examples was the Polaris. Damage to its power plant could not be repaired, since the reactor itself was the power plant, and repair tools could not reach it to repair it. Even if you decided to risk your health by trying to repair it in the irradiated coolant pool, the power plant would still refuse to be repaired, as the tool could not seem to be able to reach it properly. The Polaris also had other glaring issues, such as the engineering bay still having problems with its stairs, causing players to clip out of it while the ship was moving. So your engineers would just get sucked out into space even during combat, and CIG needs to address this. This is an issue that's been going on with this ship since the Polaris was first introduced. Other problems we faced were some oversights with some doors. We ran into problems with, more specifically, the Starlancer. Despite it having overrides for the doors when the power was out, the doors from the mess hall actually weren't able to be opened. You had to actually go to the other side of the ship in the corridors to open it, which was a problem if your crew was already in the front cabin. We had a problem in our testing where our ship lost power and everybody had to run to the back of the ship, but we couldn't get to the engineering bay because the mess hall was completely locked out. So we had to actually clip through the door to get to the other side to hit the override. So these are just oversights that CIG needs to fix. Currently, if a ship has multiple engineering consoles, only one will be considered the master console that has the ability to see the components, rooms, and toggle the doors. There used to be an exclusivity button on the consoles in previous builds, and then later builds, for some reason, that button went away. And I'm wondering if that is what's causing that problem, as there's one console that takes exclusive control. Right now, currently, engineering consoles show power allocation, and it shows high and low power output settings, with gold being an indicator that that is the high power output setting. The more power allocated to a system, the more heat it generates. Right now, it is unclear as to what exactly the benefits and drawbacks are for changing these values, other than a couple of things that are easily to understand, like for example, putting power to weapons gives you a bigger mag pull, for example. We know that increasing weapons, shields, or thrusters improves performance at the cost of heat, but I feel like the consoles should relay that info as well, even if it's just the text showing percentage improvements and percent heat increases. Just give me something to tell me what my current balancing act is currently doing to the ship. Like I said, the power page gives you a very vague and basic heat meter that tells you nothing really. It just tells you heat is trending up or down, but it doesn't tell you by how much. More info is always good in my opinion, and right now there is just a distinct lack of it. And that pretty much wraps up everything that I wanted to talk about when it comes to engineering. Now, I may sound a little bit different than I did earlier, and that's because I'm re-recording this outro because we just got a new little bit of information that just popped up in my feed, and that of course is 4.5 was added as part of the new card here for December. At least that's the target date right now currently for it. This is tentative Q4 here, and usually that generally means it's around December we're going to see something like this. And it has a few updates here. You know, you got AI, you got some physical helmets, which also was in the tech preview, by the way, and I'm putting a little example of that here for you to take a look. It's very cool. New barrel attachments that they're working on. That's all well and good, as well as having Vulcan and all that, and some new beards and all that. And while that is exciting, one of the most important features coming in 4.5 is engineering and, of course, fire as well. So yeah, it looks like CIG is targeting 4.5 to be the release of engineering, so that's going to be for December's release. Latest, possibly January, but CIG's been trying to target within the same month, so it's possible we're going to see that in December. Obviously, this is not final. It does not mean it is 100% coming in December. That is why it's marked as tentative, of course. But it does mean that CIG feels it's ready enough to be put out into everybody's hands. So let me know your thoughts. Did you get a chance to try this yourself in the tech preview? Let me know what you thought of it. Did you like it, dislike it? Was there things that you thought they could have changed or done better? I would love to hear your opinion on that. And if you didn't get a chance to try it out, but you watched other people like myself and many of the other talented creators in Star Citizen's community check out the engineering tech preview, what did you like or did not like that was presented in the tech preview? Let me know your thoughts, and let me know your thoughts about the upcoming engineering being brought in potentially for 4.5. Exciting stuff. So yeah, drop those thoughts you have wriggling in your gray matter below, and let's have a chat. Alright, until next time, fly safe, keep those thrusters hot, and I'll see you all in the black.